Most of the men who arrived on the hilltops in Vietnam were barely out of high school. They stepped into positions already in operation where the ground was packed dirt, the bunkers were crowded and wet, and big guns fired day and night. There was little separation between living space and fighting position, and privacy did not exist inside the wire. Sleep came between fire missions, and meals were usually eaten cold whenever there was time. This account follows one 20-year-old soldier through that experience and the kind of work that defined a tour on an artillery firebase. There are places that exist only in memory now. Bare hilltops in South Vietnam, where young men lived in conditions most Americans couldn't fathom. They were isolated artillery positions cut from jungle and red earth, surrounded by wire and sandbags that never seemed quite thick enough. Among the men assigned to those positions was 20-year-old Private First Class Dan Libby from Clarksville, Tennessee. The soldiers who served on these bases rarely talked about it afterward in detail, not because it lacked importance, but because the experience couldn't be explained to anyone who wasn't there. For months at a time, they defended small pieces of high ground through monsoon rains and enemy attacks, while firing thousands of artillery rounds in support of infantry they would never meet. Individual fights were won and lost, but the work continued the same regardless. The Vietnam War wasn't conventional. Enemy forces moved through jungle and villages, appearing briefly and disappearing before a response could be organized. Patrols could search for days and find nothing, then suddenly meet prepared resistance. Ground was cleared, but very rarely held for any length of time. Commanders would turn to firepower instead of constant presence. Artillery could reach farther than patrols could travel. If guns were placed on high ground across contested areas, infantry units anywhere nearby could call for support within minutes. And by late 1965, Army engineers began carving hilltops into fortified gun platforms. Before arriving in Vietnam, Libby was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. There he went through basic combat training and advanced individual training at the Field Artillery Training Base. Life on a firebase was dirty and often dangerous. The position was fixed and easy to locate, and the guns worked through much of the day and night. On a firebase, the men lived very close together. Bunkers, guns, and ammunition were all jammed into the same space, and there was little separation between work and rest. Privacy was nearly non-existent, and most daily routines were done in view of others simply because there was nowhere else to go. Meals followed the same pattern. The soldiers ate mostly sea rations, sometimes hot, but most of the time cold, and usually ate while at the gun. Missions would often follow the same order. Data would come from the Fire Direction Center, would be repeated back, set on the weapon, and checked by another crewman before firing. Each man was trained on every position, loading, setting, or handling ammunition. Some nights required only a few rounds. Others lasted for hours as crews rotated behind the piece while barrels cooled between volleys. Coordinates would be called into the Fire Direction Center through the radio. Smoke rounds would usually be fired and observers would call back with adjustments. When the placement looked good, the guns would fire for effect. The bases weren't always permanent. When operations shifted, the guns moved. Libby helped secure the equipment, convoy to a new hilltop, and repeat the process of clearing, digging, wiring, and registering the pieces again. Within hours, the new location worked like the last. Within days, it felt the same. Helicopters were essential to the operation of a fire support base. Many of these positions were isolated and reachable only by air, and at times completely cut off from ground movement. Aircraft brought ammunition, water, rations, and replacement personnel, often landing briefly before departing to reduce exposure. The same flights carried equipment in and removed damaged gear when necessary, allowing the position to continue operating without interruption. Without regular helicopter support, most of these hilltop gun positions could not have remained in service for long. Incoming fire was part of life on a fixed gun position. The sound of outgoing artillery made the firebase easy to locate, and mortars or rockets were a daily occurrence. When rounds would come in, soldiers would rush to find cover, waiting out the barrage. After each attack, the base would be inspected for damage. Sandbags were replaced, equipment reset, and the perimeter re-established. Sometimes men were wounded and carried to the landing zone for evacuation, and sometimes they were lost. Others filled the empty positions on the line, and the work continued. Libby would return to the guns when the barrage slowed or lifted, and the routine would continue. Time on a firebase exhausting, filled with periods of waiting followed by sudden chaos, then waiting again. Some nights were quiet enough for sleep, but most times were filled with incoming or outgoing. As tours came to an end or men were evacuated, new young men were sent to fill positions, and the war continued, month after month and year after year. Libby survived his tour in Vietnam, but will never forget the men he served with. These friendships are not like any others and can last a lifetime. Men who lived together, fought together, and sometimes died together on a dirty patch of land in a foreign country most didn't want to be in.
Leave it all behind. Let it all go. It's not worth it anymore. You can't convince them or change their minds. It's hard to be kind. You're accused out of thin air. Some people, you don't know them, and they won't know you. Friends can easily become a foe. Blood sometimes just won't let you go.